the Reading Corner today. I'm really delighted to have Jeremy Strong. We're going to be talking about his latest novel, Fox Goes North, which I have to say for me was one of the most affecting reads of this year. A beautiful, beautiful book, and it shows that you can write about deep things with economy.
Well, thank you. That's a very kind thing to say. I'm glad it's gone down so well with you.
Fox Goes North is in that tradition of animal fable.
Yes.
And in this story, we have a moose, a bear, a toucan, and they're joined right at the beginning by an elderly fox. This band of creatures are travelling together northwards to see the wonderful northern lights. I have never seen them. Have you?
No. I would dearly love to see them, but we shall see. And I know there's so many who've been and gone and not seen them. I suppose one just has to keep going back and trying. But certainly it's one of those absolute wonders that I would really love to be able to have witnessed.
How does telling such an important story with animal characters add depth and power than if, for example, you were telling it with humans?
That is a very good question. The short answer, of course, is that you can more or less say what you like about animals, and you can't about humans. You can't say, oh, she's so grossly overweight, it was a wonder the bus didn't fall over. Whereas with animal characters, you can describe them exactly as they are. It doesn't matter how fat they are, how thin, how old, what they believe in. You get a far greater range of freedom when you're writing about animals. The stories that I've done in the past have always been very funny, slapdash, almost comic strip style stories. Yeah, I still had to be careful. And that, of course, has played more of a presence in writing for children now. If you are writing about real people, you are coming up against more and more problems with how do you actually define somebody? How do you talk about them without saying something unnecessary? That was part of what was in my mind. But also for at least 40 or so of my 50 years of writing, I've been wanting to write about a group of animals. First story I ever tried to write about for children was about a group of animals. It was a bit Winnie the Poohish, as one does when one is young. But I'd never found a way of writing that story until, and this came quite out of the blue, I got this idea for an expedition to the North Pole because I wanted to write about a group of animals who were searching for beauty, for meaning in life. And it would be a group that would always be together. I'd even thought, who knows, there might be a second book. I doubt that there very much will be, but it was a possibility. It was such a colourful idea, having the topsy-turvy caravan, more like a house than a caravan, and with these disparate group of animals, which were very carefully chosen. I didn't just say, oh, I think I'll have a llama and a bear. It was much more deliberate than that because I was thinking of diversity.
I can see how a moose, having seen one in the wild, would be such a stoical animal. But a toucan, where did the toucan come from?
The toucan was just about the first creature to come along. And he came along instantaneously with his magnetic beak. And it was the magnetic beak that got me thinking, I've got a very odd character here. This guy's going to be a bit of fun because he's going to be self-important. And although his magnetic beak is useful, it's also useless. It's only useful when it is pointing north.
The toucan is a character who, it's very visual because of its colour, but also you don't often get stories with toucans in. So it's going to be something that really stands out when people read this.
It didn't occur to me at any time to deliberately exclude certain characters. Rather, my brain tends to work in the opposite direction. It tends to accept things which would normally not be acceptable, just for the sake of being stubborn and annoying. and it's always seemed to work quite well. The point is, I guess, it doesn't really matter in some ways what the animals are, because the most important thing is that they are working together and they are great friends, even though they obviously quarrel sometimes, as people do.
Of course, the central character is the fox. She's in the title, and as the journey goes on, she becomes even more significant. She's an artist, and as Bear observes, she loves colour, music, words, and nature. On her journey, she produces some beautiful land art, which is reminiscent of Andy Galsworthy's natural sculptures. And I know that you reference him in your acknowledgements. I wondered if you could tell us something about your encounters with his art and the impact that it's had on you.
Andy Goldsworthy, I came across actually in a book. I was probably at Tate Modern in the shop there, just looking at the books. I regret to admit I've never actually seen his work live. But of course, the photographs tell his stories so well. And there's something so appealing about how ephemeral it all is, and that art is found in so many ways, many of which we miss. We don't necessarily recognize a pattern that's been laid down by old leaves that seem to represent something. You can't necessarily be sure what it is. I mean, a lot of Andy Goldsworthy's work, of course, is fairly obvious because he's building stone circles, making pathways, and basically showing how we should be looking at the world more carefully and noticing these things. I mean, people do it all the time on a much simpler level, don't they? When they say, "Oh, look, there's a cloud up there in the sky that looks just like an elephant," and there's that sort of funny kind of feeling that you know perfectly well it's not an elephant, it's a cloud, but you're able to share that moment because it's shaped like an elephant. You can talk to somebody about it. You become more and more aware of the amount of inherent nature there is around us. They're just things that are part of our world.
Of course, Fox creates her artwork. Some of them, as you say, are ephemeral, very transient. They're made from nature and nature can blow them away.
Yes.
But she's very particular about her last creation. I wonder if you could tell us something about that.
Oh, this is like a Fibonacci spiral. I think quite simply because it's so open. I'm not a mathematician. I'm useless at physics, but I do read a little about it from time to time, and things like the Fibonacci spiral, which just sort of keeps edging off. It's got such a lovely sense of power behind it. It's never going to finish. It's just going to go on, getting wider and wider. Our own awareness of even that little part of it that we know that it's going to forever get bigger and bigger. It will take you to every corner of the universe eventually. Obviously, I haven't put that in the book, but I hope what I have got in the book is that the child learns in reading the book that the spiral goes on forever and is never contained. And that is our world. That is our universe. For every single one of us, we are our own Fibonacci spiral.
Of course, you've already told us that readers will be familiar with your funny books. Cartoon Kid, My Brother's Famous Bottom, Viking at School, 100 Mile an Hour Dog. There are so many of them, and they're hilarious, and they've turned many non-readers into readers. Fox Goes North is very different in tone. The story, as we are alluding to, is a deep one with many philosophical considerations, but it's certainly not without humour. And I love the characterisation of toucan and llama. That's just the source of some of the humour, and they do contrast with the other characters. But I wondered whether generally you could tell us why humour is important to you and why you think it's important to us as human beings.
When I first started writing stories for children, I'd also begun teaching, so I needed a job. So I went into primary school teaching, and I was lucky enough to find a little niche, which quickly became a big niche in writing funny stories that children could read for themselves. And I found a publisher who had a dyslexic child by pure coincidence, and he found that my writing was very suitable for his child to read, and things grew from there. In fact, that publisher was A&C Black, and they were starting up a series with K. Umansky and myself and Terry Deary, and the three of us more or less provided the first 20 or 30 books in that series. Anyhow, I was learning on the job. I'd become a writer. I'd also become a teacher of 8 and 9-year-olds, which was just the age ready for independent readers. So that was when I began writing all those constantly funny, simple to read books that would get children into reading. And that went on for a long time, gradually, until about, it was getting on for 8 or 10 years ago. I began to think, I want to do more than this. I'm getting a bit bored. I don't want to carry on writing just doggedly, literally doggedly funny stories. I wanted to try and extend myself a little. And that was when I started writing the Armadillo and Hare stories. Fox Goes North, which is veering towards a more serious side, I suppose.
You've told us a little bit about Toucan already, but while we're talking about humour, we must talk about Llama. So Llama is your egocentric child.
Absolutely. Llama came storming out of the blue. I didn't know Llama was going to be in it at all. There were several moments in that story where things happened almost as if they were meant to happen, things that I hadn't planned at all. I hadn't planned Little Owl, but I just fell in love with the Llama the moment he appeared, just crashing out of the blue and telling everyone that she loved them, and seemed the perfect counterfoil to Moose's not always motherly help.
There are definitely characters that are more childlike and those that are more grown up.
Yes, of course, you've got Fox, whose old age drives the entire story.
Journey to the Northern Lights, the animals face a great danger, and you do feel the jeopardy of their situation. There's a great forest fire, it threatens to engulf them. The wheel on their wagon is literally in danger of collapsing. Carl Jung once wrote that the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. So I wondered whether you would agree that when the animals are faced with that life-threatening danger, we find out who they really are.
Yes, because they all come together to help each other. I did like the image of Toucan wrapping towels around Moose's head and having to guide him because Moose is now blind. I love that image of them helping each other in that way and trusting each other, of course. So I suppose the animals are there. They're still friends at the end of their journey, all together, even with Fox standing there in the snow on her final journey. I think they speak truths to each other.
Yeah.
Especially Fox talking to Moose and Bear sometimes.
So loved the scene where instead of catastrophizing, Llama reads stories to the other smaller creatures that calm them in the face of danger.
Yes. And there's also at the end, of course, the story ends as much a celebration as a funeral.
I think that last journey, Bear says, the end of any adventure always comes with sadness, but I am old and tired, Moose, I am ready. Death is a subject that 20 years ago, as you know, probably wouldn't have been written about very much in children's books. Today we see more, but it's often from the point of view of grieving for somebody that's gone. Very little about making a final journey, as this book is. It did remind me a little bit of Reepicheep in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but without the Judeo-Christian overtones. It's very explicit in that book. Your writing about Fox's final resting place is so beautiful, gentle, elegiac, and above all, really hopeful. Can you tell us something about writing those last scenes and what you hope readers will take from the story?
The last two scenes were actually the first two scenes that I wrote when I began the story. I always do quite a lot of planning and thinking through. So I had all my notes and everything, and I suddenly realized that I knew exactly how I wanted the ending of the book to finish, and I wanted to write it down before I forgot it all. So I began the story by writing the last two chapters. It took me a little while, but I realized as I was writing those chapters, I was writing my own journey as well as Fox's. Mm. It was a double journey. I tried to keep my journey in the background, my feelings about it in the background as much as possible, because I didn't want it to inform the Fox Goes North story. But yes, I was aware that I was writing about myself as well as Fox. And it was actually very, very comforting.
Mm. One of the contrasts in the story is between home and adventure, both of which are valued in the story. It's not that one is better than the other. You write about the excitement of the wildness and the unknown, but also you can sink into the comfort of the familiar and the feeling of family in this story as well. I think they are central concerns of childhood, home and away. And I think they continue to be important to all of us through life. I wondered if you would say something about those contrasting dispositions and how they might have played into your own life, home and adventure.
Interesting question. From the age of about 15, I suppose, I always wanted to leave home. I always wanted to travel. I never did. I got married. I had children. I settled down. But even when I was teaching, I would often turn to the back pages of the Times educational supplements and say to my wife, look, there's a teaching job in Borneo here. What do you think? We never went, of course. We always stayed home. But that desire to travel and to see other worlds, other ways of doing things was there from the age of 15 or so. As soon as I got the chance to move away to university, that was it. Off we went.
I did want to feed back to you that being a teacher myself, from decades of working with children and young people, I know that your stories have made an enormous difference to many young lives. And I organised Stephen Butler's first ever author visit in East London. And one of the things that he told me, one of the first things that he told me as we travelled in the car to the school, was that you had been his headmaster and that he would never have become a reader or a writer if it hadn't been for you. So which of your achievements are you most proud?
I think to know that something like 8 or 9 million books, I'm not sure, have gone into children's hands and hopefully opened up doors for many of them and introduced the pleasure of reading. I mean, that would be such a super thing to feel one had achieved. Yes. But also, I'm very proud to have finished Fox Goes North. It's my last book. And I hope in some ways maybe it will be my best one. Who knows? Time will tell.
And before we end, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would really like to say?
Yes. I was very glad that Fox was going to die. I've never written about death before in any way. And I think we need to talk about it more, especially amongst children's books. It's not something to be particularly frightened of. It's around us all the time, for heaven's sake. But it doesn't often get mentioned in children's books, except, of course, the new fast-growing genre of children's crime stories. I feel that Fox really strides that book and holds it together. It's Fox's wisdom, it's Fox's attitudes, it's Fox's submission, if you like, even to death. That's quite important. It's also celebrated, Yes, it's tragic and sad, but it also they're lifting Fox up and saying, wasn't she wonderful?
Yeah. Jeremy, it's been such a pleasure.
Question's been very interesting.